Did you know there is an entire underground city 1,100 feet beneath Detroit, 1,500 acres wide, with more than 100 miles of roads that have never once seen daylight? Or that there is an island on the Detroit River where cameras are banned, where the public is not allowed past the fence line? Or that one stop on this list is a quiet park you could drive past without slowing down, and that quiet park is the exact spot where 3 teenagers were shot in a single night, and after 3 separate trials in 3 separate courts, not one person was ever convicted? Detroit sits at the center of something most of the country stopped paying attention to a long time ago. It is the center of American industry, American uprising, and American silence. Most people drive past this city assuming they already know its danger, because they have seen the headlines and decided that was the whole story. Nobody checks whether the danger has a specific address, so settle in, because we are counting down 13 places in Detroit you should never stop while driving. Stick around to the very end, because what we saved for last is documented, unresolved, and still unmarked by anything but a small bronze sign in a patch of grass, a family-owned motel on Woodward Avenue. Coming in at number 13, the intersection that keeps its own paperwork. Here is what nobody tells you about Joy Road at the Southfield Freeway. The Michigan State Police Traffic Crash Reporting Unit logged 78 crashes and 27 injuries at this single interchange in 2024 alone. Statewide, roughly 30% of all fatal crashes in Michigan happen at intersections just like this one, according to the same crash data used to build this list. That is one documented crash roughly every 4.5 days, at one interchange, every single year, on file with the state. Most people think Detroit's worst roads are the ones with the potholes. The state police paperwork says otherwise. It is happening again tonight, somewhere on that stretch of pavement, and there will be a report filed about it by morning. Fact 12, the plant that ate itself. In the geographic heart of Detroit's east side, on East Grand Boulevard, sits what remains of the Packard Automotive Plant, designed by architect Albert Kahn, the same man behind roughly 900 other buildings across this city. At its peak, it covered 3.5 million square feet across 45 buildings, big enough that workers needed bicycles just to get from one end of the complex to the other during a shift change. By December of 2024, the majority of that complex had finally been torn down by the city itself, after officials called it a national embarrassment for decades, and a judge ordered the previous owner to demolish it after he failed to act for years. I have read the police report from inside that building, and it is not a story about architecture. A 21-year-old man was playing hide-and-seek with friends inside the abandoned plant when he fell down an elevator shaft on the 9th floor. His friends searched all night with flashlights before they found his body the next morning, buried in debris at the bottom of the shaft. A volunteer who boards up Detroit's vacant buildings for a living told reporters afterward that sites like this one are not playgrounds, that they are active demolition zones people wander into thinking they are exploring history. Hollywood shoots music videos in that building. The Detroit Police Department has a body recovery report from inside it. The site is still being demolished as you watch this. Landing at number 11, the road named after a rapper that the state tracks like a crime scene. 7 Mile Road at Interstate 75 recorded 69 crashes and 35 injuries, according to an analysis of Michigan State Police data. Most people clock 7 Mile as a Detroit rap reference, a name that means something cultural before it means something geographic. State troopers clock it as a crash report, filed and refiled, year after year, with no reference to the music at all. 35 injuries means someone on that stretch of road is hurt badly enough to need help roughly once every 10.5 days. It is still on the list this year. At number 10, the island you are not allowed on. Zug Island has been Detroit's industrial epicenter since the first blast furnace went up there in 1901, fed by iron ore shipped down from Lake Superior. In 2011, scientists working with Ontario's Ministry of Natural Resources identified the island as the probable source of a mysterious rumbling that residents across the river in Windsor, Canada, had been reporting for years, an event that came to be known internationally as the Windsor hum. A mechanical engineering professor at the University of Windsor formally studied the vibrations and published findings on the likely source. Cameras are prohibited on the island. The public is not permitted past the gate. One persistent local legend claims there is a prison hidden on the island, though no such facility has ever been confirmed to exist there. I have stood on the riverbank looking across at it, and even knowing the science, the place still does not look like it belongs to this century. This is the real explanation. It is in a government-backed report, co-investigated by engineers at a named university. The island is still off-limits anyway, and the hum went quiet only after the steel mill itself went quiet in 2020. Now, before we get to number 9, a quick word. If you can survive 8 separate documented crashes on one stretch of 8-mile road without a scratch, the least dangerous thing you will do all day is hit the subscribe button below. This channel has never once sent anyone to a hospital. We cannot say the same for the intersection we are about to cover. At number 9, the boundary that became a coordinate. 8-mile road at DeQuindre Road recorded 61 crashes, 1 confirmed fatality, and 23 injuries, according to the Michigan State Police Traffic Crash Reporting Unit. A movie turned 8 Mile into a metaphor for the line between two worlds, the boundary you had to cross to make it out. The state's paperwork does not deal in metaphors. It deals in a coordinate, a body count, and a file number updated every single year, regardless of what the culture decides the road means. The movie made 8 Mile a metaphor. The crash report makes it a coordinate. Fact 8. The Salt Sea under the city. Here is what nobody taught you about the ground you are driving on. 1,100 feet beneath Detroit sits a working salt mine that opened in 1910, covers 1,500 acres, and contains more than 100 miles of its own internal roads, none of which have ever seen sunlight. Miners down there still work the room and pillar method, removing only half the salt and leaving the rest standing as load-bearing pillars to keep the ceiling from coming down on top of them. The salt itself formed roughly 400 million years ago, during the Devonian period, the result of an ancient sea evaporating long before there was a Detroit to sit on top of it. Getting down to it cost 6 men their lives during the original construction, killed by collapsing stone, glacial drift, and pockets of hydrogen sulfide gas, according to the Detroit Salt Company's own historical record. The company that dug that shaft went bankrupt before it ever sold a single bag of salt. Most people think Detroit's most dangerous ground is on the surface. The deadliest dig in this city's history happened 1,100 feet beneath it, and the mine is still running tonight, still producing the de-icing salt that gets dumped on every one of these roads come winter. At number 7, the corner with no movie. Connor Street at Gratiot Avenue, deep in an industrial corridor most tourists never drive through, recorded 63 crashes and 34 injuries. There is no film named after this intersection, no rap lyric, no nickname anyone outside the neighborhood would recognize. There is no movie about this corner. There is just a spreadsheet, and it keeps growing every single year the state updates it, with nobody outside an insurance office ever reading the new line. Coming in at number 6, the bridge with no sidewalk. The Ambassador Bridge opened on November 15, 1929, stretches 7,500 feet across the Detroit River, and rises 386 feet above the water on a suspension span that was for 2 years the longest in the world. It carries more than 25% of all merchandise trade between the United States and Canada by value across just 4 lanes, with roughly 10,000 trucks and 4,000 passenger vehicles crossing on an average day. The bridge originally had pedestrian sidewalks. They were closed after September 11, 2001, and they have never reopened, which means there is no way to cross this particular stretch of international border on foot, ever, for any reason. For nearly a century, this was the busiest commercial border crossing in North America, until 2025, when the Blue Water Bridge further north finally edged it out in truck volume. and the two crossings combined still moved more than 9 million vehicles across the same international border in a single year. Most people see a postcard. United States Customs sees 25% of two nations' trade balanced on a single privately owned bridge, with no path for a person on foot to ever cross it. And keep going, because the last stop on this list is not loud, and it is not big, and it does not look like anything from the road. That is exactly what makes it the hardest one to drive past once you know what happened there. Fact 5. The night the city was on fire every year. Here is what Hollywood never told you about Devil's Night. In 1984, the Detroit Fire Department extinguished more than 800 fires across the city over a single 3-day period, the highest number ever recorded, according to the Detroit Historical Society and the department's own logs. That is more than 11 calls answered every single hour, at the peak, for 3 straight days, while Mayor Coleman Young publicly called it a vision from hell. A film made Devil's Night into Gothic atmosphere, a single haunting image of a burning skyline used as a backdrop for a superhero's revenge. The real record is a 1-year-old girl killed in a 1994 apartment fire, with 4 others injured in the same blaze. That is what it finally took for the city to organize tens of thousands of volunteers into an overnight patrol program that walked these same blocks, watching, until the fires dropped by the late 1980s to under 104 in a single night. Hollywood used it as set dressing for a horror film. It took the death of a 1-year-old to actually stop it. The fires mostly ended by the 2000s, but the fire department's logs from those years are still sitting in the record, untouched, unforgotten by the people who walked those patrols. At number 4, the freeway nobody photographs. Warren Avenue at Interstate 75 recorded 51 crashes and 17 injuries. It is not the deadliest intersection on this list. It is not the most famous. It does not have a movie, a song, or a nickname attached to it. It is just one more entry the state has on file, sitting quietly behind the ones with names attached, proof that the danger here was never about reputation. It was always about volume, logged the same way whether anyone is watching or not. Landing at number 3, 14 million fish and nowhere to park. Every spring, about 14 million walleye leave Lake Erie and push up the Detroit River to spawn, out of an estimated 77 million walleye that overwintered in the lake that year, according to Michigan Department of Natural Resources data. That makes the Detroit River home to the largest walleye migration on the entire planet, with shore anglers lining piers at Belle Isle and a dedicated wildlife refuge pier stretching 775 feet into the river just downstream, built specifically so people without a boat could stand in the middle of the run. I have stood on that riverbank during the run and watched the water itself seem to shift with the current of fish beneath it. Packed so dense in places, you could believe the river had a pulse of its own, and I still cannot fully explain what I was looking at. Almost nobody outside Michigan has been told that the biggest fish migration on Earth happens 20 feet from Detroit traffic every single spring, in the same river that runs past Zug Island. The same river the Ambassador Bridge crosses high above happens again next spring on schedule, whether anyone outside this state is watching or not. At number 2, the corner with no building on it. There is one more stop before the final story, and it will not look like much when you get there. No structure, no marker visible from the road unless you already know to look for it. Just a quiet patch of grass near Woodward Avenue, owned now by a neighborhood development group, sitting exactly where something happened that the city spent decades hoping nobody would ask about. There is nothing standing on this corner anymore. That is exactly the point. And the reason nothing is standing there is the story we have been building toward this entire video. And finally, number 1, what happened at the Algiers Motel. In 1965, a black-owned business opened at 8301 Woodward Avenue, purchased by Sam Gant and McCurrant Pie. Before they bought it, the motel's previous white owner had barred black guests entirely. Under Gant and Pie, the Algiers became something else, a place where black Detroiters traveling through the city could simply stay the night without being turned away at the door, one of 3 motels the 2 men owned across the city. After midnight on July 26, 1967, on the 4th night of the citywide uprising that had already left dozens dead across Detroit, a National Guardsman stationed nearby reported what he believed were gunshots coming from behind the motel. Detroit police officers, Michigan State Police troopers, and Michigan Army National Guardsmen converged on the property and raided a 3-story annex behind the main building known as the Manor House, where guests had gathered that night to wait out the curfew together. By morning, 3 young black men were dead inside that annex. Carl Cooper was 17 years old. He was the first found. Fred Temple was 18. He died in the same building, the same night, just down the hall from Cooper. Aubrey Pollard was 19, the oldest of the 3, and the last to die. 9 other people inside the building that night, including 2 white women and 7 black men, were beaten or abused by the officers before the raid finally ended before dawn. The officers involved did not file a police report for 5 days, breaking standard protocol entirely. On July 31, 1967, the Detroit Free Press published its own investigation and reported that, contrary to the official police account of a firefight, the 3 teenagers had been killed at close range, not in any exchange of gunfire at all. 3 officers eventually faced trial. Then, they faced trial again. Then, a 3rd time, in a 3rd jurisdiction, local, then state, then finally federal. I have read every account of those 3 trials that exists in the public record, and I cannot tell you how 3 confirmed killings, contradicted by a contemporaneous newspaper investigation, and including at least 1 officer's own confession during the proceedings, produced not one single conviction. Nobody can. All 3 officers were acquitted each time by all white juries. The motel was torn down in 1979. For 44 years, nothing marked the spot. The lot sat empty, then became a small park, owned by a neighborhood development organization with no sign and no name attached to what had happened there. Just grass where a building used to stand. Then, in 2023, the Michigan Historical Commission erected a marker on the site. On July 26, 2024, exactly 57 years to the day, survivors and family members of Cooper, Temple, and Pollard gathered there for the dedication. Lee Forsyth, who survived the raid as a teenager and lost his best friend Carl Cooper that night, told reporters he could still hear his best friend take his last breath beside him, that he could hear the air go out of him like it happened yesterday. A civil rights historian who studied the case told reporters that the act of tearing the motel down had itself been a kind of forced forgetting, and that the marker was the first thing in nearly 5 decades that made forgetting impossible. There is nothing left to see at 8301 Woodward Avenue. No motel, no annex, no crime scene tape. Just a quiet park, a single bronze marker, and 3 names the city spent 44 years hoping you would forget to ask about.